Hello, everyone. Today we're venturing into the life of a man who was warm-hearted from childhood, disciplined in adulthood, and legendary by the end of his journey. Lieutenant Michael Patrick Murphy, better known to friends and loved ones simply as Murph or the Protector. His is a story that shines a light on kindness, courage, and what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. By the end of this, you may find yourself reflecting on what personal sacrifice truly means and why. Even in a world that often seems chaotic, a single act of bravery can echo through generations. From the outset, it's easy to see how Michael Murphy caught people's attention. He had a relaxed, friendly way of carrying himself, even as a child. Some might say he seemed born with an innate sense of justice. Growing up on Long Island in a neighborhood that balanced small-town familiarity with the bustling pace of nearby New York City, he wasn't the type to seek the spotlight. Nonetheless, over time, he became a name spoken with both reverence and affection, not only within the U.S. Navy but across the country and beyond. The seeds of the man he'd become were planted in those early years, nourished by a deep moral sense and a desire to protect those in need. He was born on May 7, 1976 in Smithtown, New York, just a short drive from the quiet, close-knit community of Patchogue. Raised by Daniel and Maureen Murphy, Michael was a bright child from the start, always asking questions and showing curiosity about how the world worked. Daniel Murphy was himself a Vietnam War veteran, someone who understood duty and sacrifice, though he rarely flaunted his own experiences. Quiet perseverance and humility were part of his example. Michael absorbed that ethos naturally. He saw that true integrity involved doing the right thing even if no one else was watching, and that courage often meant standing up for others instead of only thinking of yourself. As a child, Michael was never the kind of boy who got into fights for attention's sake. On the contrary, he was the one who would rush to break them up if a vulnerable friend was being bullied. Stories are still recounted in Patchogue about how he'd defend a special needs student who was teased by classmates. While many children might have stepped aside to avoid any discomfort or confrontation, Michael was different. He stood between bullies and their target, an instinctual drive to champion the underdog. It was a small school anecdote that carried a bigger meaning. Here was a teenager quietly forging the foundations of a moral code. He would later stand by with unwavering determination, even on a battlefield thousands of miles from home. He earned the nickname the Protector. That might sound dramatic for a kid on Long Island, but it truly summed up who he was. The label wasn't self-proclaimed. It was bestowed by those who witnessed him show compassion, loyalty, and fearlessness on a daily basis. It hinted at his future path, though few could have guessed at the epic scale on which he would come to embody that title. During these formative years, Michael also demonstrated a strong academic bent. He wasn't satisfied with half measures. If there was a book to be read, he'd delve into it wholeheartedly. If there was a question stirring in his mind, he had to find the answer. That willingness to dig deep made him stand out, even from an early age. But school was not merely about scores and tests for him. According to friends, he was also the boy who could take a busy day and still carve out moments to help someone who was struggling with homework. He nurtured strong friendships, never letting competitiveness overshadow empathy. In 1994, Michael graduated from Patchogue Medford High School. By then, teachers saw him not just as a great student, but as someone who could be relied upon in any circumstance. There's a story that often slips by in some official accounts, but which speaks volumes about his character. During one high school sports event, he was a lean, active young man who enjoyed running and could outrun many of his peers. He noticed someone twisting an ankle on the field. Without hesitation, he left the game to help them over to safety, ignoring his own potential glory in the match. Reflecting on it now, this was yet another puzzle piece that would fit into the bigger picture of who he'd become. After high school, Michael was accepted into Pennsylvania State University. Heading to Penn State, as it's commonly known, was a momentous change for someone who had so far spent most of his life in the same cozy region. For many, that leap from hometown to the bigger world of a university campus can be intimidating, but Michael thrived on new experiences. He dove into campus life with the same gusto he'd shown as a child. He studied political science and psychology, two very people-focused disciplines that gave him a solid understanding of how societies function and how individuals think. That combination of academic majors, bridging politics and human behavior, mirrored the balanced approach he took in life. He believed in the importance of both big-picture thinking and compassion for individuals. Those 4 years at Penn State also shaped him in other ways. His social circle expanded, and he formed lifelong bonds. One of the most significant relationships to come from this period was with Heather Duggan, a fellow student who was drawn to Michael's warmth and dedication. College sweethearts often dream of the future they'll share together, imagining a life that balances career, personal aspirations, and, of course, love. For Michael, that future included a deep desire to serve his country in the military, a choice that aligned with his father's example and his own moral inclinations. Heather accepted that path, understanding that the man she loved could not be happy unless he was acting on his profound sense of duty. The two eventually became engaged, planning to marry in November 2005. At the time, everything looked bright. They were forging a path toward a loving family life, even as Michael prepared for a demanding and dangerous career. Graduating from Penn State in 1998 with dual degrees, Michael had proven his academic prowess. He'd also proven something else about himself. When he set his mind to something, he followed through with unwavering commitment. The question was, what next? The late 1990s were a relatively peaceful time on the global stage compared to what was coming. Still, for someone determined to serve, there was no shortage of challenges that might lie ahead. Michael decided that the U.S. Navy would be his next big step, and the elite training pipeline to become a Navy SEAL captured his imagination. The SEALs, renowned for operating in the toughest conditions with near superhuman perseverance, matched Michael's personality. He was not interested in half measures or in playing it safe. More than that, though, the SEAL ethos, an unwavering loyalty to teammates, a vow to defend those who cannot defend themselves, resonated deeply with his personal code, which had been so visible ever since childhood. In December 2000, Michael commissioned as an ensign in the Navy. The date marked the beginning of a remarkable transformation from scholar to warrior. If you can imagine him standing there, a crisp uniform replacing the casual college attire, you might picture how proud his family felt, particularly his father, Daniel, who understood better than most what it means to wear the uniform of the United States. Even in these early Navy days, Michael's approach was the same, a readiness to put in the hard work, face every hurdle, and complete any challenge thrown his way. That determination was put to the test soon enough. The basic underwater demolition /SEAL, BUD/S training is notorious for its high attrition rate. It's an arena that strips away pretenses and tests whether someone has the raw grit, teamwork, and mental resilience required to keep going under extremes, freezing water, relentless physical trials, and psychologically punishing tasks at all hours of the day or night. Those who endure it with unbreakable resolve earn their SEAL trident. Michael joined Class 236 and conquered the crucible in November 2001. Amid the global tremors caused by the attacks of September 11th, 2001, the timing was ominous. The U.S. soon would be plunged into prolonged conflicts, and SEALs were in higher demand than ever. Michael stood at the threshold of a new era, both for himself and for the country. Upon successfully completing BUD/S, he was assigned to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1, SDVT-1, in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, a place that for generations has symbolized both a tranquil paradise and a historic link to American sacrifice and military readiness. While stationed in Hawaii, Michael found moments to appreciate the natural beauty of the islands, running on beaches and taking in the spectacular sunsets, though he was never one to lavish all his free time on leisure. His focus remained on perfecting his craft as a SEAL. Over time, he earned the deep respect of teammates, not just for his physical prowess, but for his calm, guiding leadership style. If someone struggled, he'd be the first to offer a helping hand or encouraging word. If a plan needed refining, he'd meticulously work through it with the group. The everyday tasks of readiness drills and field exercises all became stepping stones toward a greater mission. Throughout the early 2000s, Michael deployed to various hotspots, sharpening his operational expertise. In 2002, he traveled to Jordan as a liaison officer for an exercise known as Early Victor. Each of these assignments taught him new lessons in international collaboration, cross-cultural communication, and the many shades of complexity in modern warfare. He was building not just a stellar military resume, but also a nuanced perspective on the geopolitical current shaping global events. By now, the stage was set for further deployments. He served in Qatar, offering support during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and spent time in Djibouti participating in strategic operational planning. For many young service members, jumping between countries can be both exhilarating and disorienting. For Michael, though, it was a chance to deepen his commitment. He thrived on the challenge of coordinating with others in foreign environments, making sure lines of communication stayed clear. Whenever he found downtime, he continued to read. His love of books was well known among close friends. One novel in particular captured his imagination, Gates of Fire, by Stephen Pressfield, a historical fiction about the Spartan stand at Thermopylae. Accounts say Michael read it multiple times, drawn to its themes of valor, camaraderie, and sacrifice against overwhelming odds. Then came the fateful year of 2005. Alpha Platoon of SDVT-1 was mobilized for deployment in Afghanistan, part of the ongoing Operation Enduring Freedom. The War on Terror was at a pivotal stage, and the rugged mountains of the Afghan frontier were riddled with insurgent enclaves. For special operations forces like the SEALs, this demanding theater of war offered high-stakes missions requiring stealth, precision, and relentless determination. Michael, now a lieutenant, led his men into a zone where the lines between friend and foe were murky, local alliances shifted overnight, and the sheer terrain, steep rocky hillsides under scorching sun by day and bitter cold by night, posed as much of a challenge as the enemy did. If you could have asked Michael what his mindset was as he entered that arena, he might have replied with the same quiet resolve people saw in him back in Patchogue. Protecting others was in his blood, and he had an almost uncanny ability to stay collected under duress. When you're in command of a SEAL platoon, you have not just your own life, but the lives of your teammates in your hands, a solemn responsibility that demands vigilance, empathy, and leadership. Michael carried it well. By late June of that year, he embarked on a mission that would become one of the most harrowing in modern U.S. military history, Operation Red Wings. The focus of the operation was to locate and possibly capture or eliminate a high-ranking Taliban leader in the rugged, mountainous region near Asadabad in Kunar Province. Alongside Michael were 3 other SEALs, Marcus Luttrell, Danny Dietz, and Matthew Axelson. For all their training and skill, the environment was uniquely challenging. Steep cliffs, dense forested areas, and limited lines of communication. Their plan was to stealthily observe the target area from a concealed position, gather intelligence, and orchestrate a larger assault if feasible. Things went wrong before they even engaged the enemy. During the early stages of the operation, unarmed Afghan civilians stumbled upon the SEAL team's hiding spot. This moment triggered a moral conundrum. The standard rules of engagement require that unarmed non-combatants be released. The men had to weigh the risk of potentially compromising their mission and their own survival against the moral and legal imperative not to harm civilians. Michael sided firmly with releasing them. This decision, at least according to accounts from the lone survivor, Marcus Luttrell, was in line with Michael's sense of right and wrong. He wasn't one to compromise ethics for convenience, no matter how severe the consequences might be. Once released, the civilians disappeared into the mountains, and the SEAL team had to assume the worst, that the Taliban would soon be alerted. Their fears proved correct. Within hours, a large and aggressive Taliban force far exceeding the small SEAL unit in numbers and firepower engaged them in a violent ambush. The firefight that erupted was like something out of an action movie, terrifying, chaotic, and lethal. Each SEAL fought desperately to hold the high ground, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. The rocky slopes offered limited cover. As bullets zipped overhead and RPGs exploded around them, Michael's leadership was crucial. He directed fire, communicated with his teammates, and attempted to orchestrate a fighting withdrawal. At some point during this furious clash, their communications link faltered. They had a satellite phone, but using it required stepping out from cover. The team was pinned down, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Recognizing that immediate support was their only hope, Michael made the single most selfless and fateful decision of his life. He left his cover, fully exposing himself to enemy fire, to place a call for reinforcements. The bullets churned the ground around him, and one found its mark. Even as he was shot, he completed the call, calmly relaying critical information about the team's position and the urgent need for rescue. This extraordinary act of courage would cost him his life. Wounded and unable to continue the fight effectively, Michael held on for as long as his body allowed. At some point after making that call, the injuries proved mortal. He died on June 28, 2005, in those unforgiving mountains. The tragedy was compounded when the responding rescue helicopter loaded with additional SEALs and Army Night Stalkers was shot down by a rocket-propelled grenade. All 16 people aboard perished. In a matter of hours, 19 members of the U.S. Special Operations community were gone. Only Marcus Luttrell survived from the 4-man recon team, living to share the story of how Michael's bravery was pivotal in giving even one person a chance to carry the truth of that mission home. When the dust settled, the American public learned piece by piece what had happened. The loss of so many elite operators shook the nation's military communities to their core. Yet amid the heartbreak, people found inspiration in Michael's final act. The image of a gravely wounded officer braving enemy fire to save his brothers encapsulated the ethos of no man left behind. It was the purest demonstration of the spirit that had guided him since those childhood days in Patchogue, when he'd stepped up to protect a bullied friend. He had sacrificed everything for the sake of his teammates. The official recognition of Michael's heroism took the form of the Medal of Honor, awarded posthumously on October 22, 2007, by President George W. Bush. It was the first time a member of the U.S. Navy had received the medal since the Vietnam War. Many statements were made that day lauding his bravery, but it was perhaps the simplest tributes, those from his family, from Marcus Luttrell, from the men who served with him, that cut the deepest. Their accounts portrayed Michael as a fiercely loyal friend, someone who never sought to be a hero, but became one nonetheless, someone who clung to moral principle even in the crucible of war. He also received numerous other decorations, among them the Purple Heart, Joint Service Commendation Medal, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, and the Combat Action Ribbon. Each decoration told another chapter of a life devoted to service. Looking at them collectively, it's almost hard to fathom that one man, still in his 20s, could accumulate such honor. Yet if you asked anyone who really knew him, they would tell you none of it was surprising. He was born for this role, carrying the same protective spirit from boyhood to battlefield. The official tributes did not stop there. The USS Michael Murphy, DDG-112, a guided missile destroyer, was named in his honor. The ship sails the seas as a living memorial to the values he championed. Additionally, his hometown in Patchogue dedicated the Michael P. Murphy Memorial Park, a communal space where residents can remember the local kid who grew up to exemplify the best of the American spirit. Later, the Lieutenant Michael P. Murphy Navy SEAL Museum was established in West Sayville, another tangible reminder of his legacy. These memorials are more than statues or plaques. They're places for reflection, for renewing a sense of purpose, and for teaching younger generations about sacrifice and duty. A more grassroots tradition also emerged, the Murph Challenge. This CrossFit workout, which Michael himself liked to do, consists of a 1-mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and another 1-mile run, all while wearing a 20-pound vest. Not only is it grueling, akin to an homage to the physical rigors Michael endured in Badass, but it's also performed annually on Memorial Day by athletes, service members, and everyday citizens around the world. For many, it's not just a workout, it's a tribute to Michael's memory and to all the servicemen and women who have laid down their lives. As participants gasp for breath, push through muscle pain, and fight the urge to quit, they catch a glimpse of the determination Michael had in far more dire circumstances. The story of Operation Red Wings also made it to Hollywood with the 2013 film Lone Survivor, in which Michael was portrayed by actor Taylor Kitsch. While dramatized, the film introduced a wider public to the events in Afghanistan's mountains and gave visual weight to the heroism and tragedy of that day. For many viewers, Michael Murphy's name came to represent the unwavering will of the SEAL community. The film left audiences shaken and inspired, though it naturally couldn't capture every nuance of the real events. Still, it served as a cinematic testament to the story. If you peel back the layers further, you'll find a tapestry of lesser-known details about Michael. For instance, he graduated with honors from Penn State. He wasn't just an average student who skated by. He fully invested in his studies. Beyond the battlefield, he was an avid reader and thinker, known to discuss philosophy and historical battles. With the same passion some people have for sports, there's a touching recollection from one friend who said Michael would lend out his personal copy of Gates of Fire to teammates, encouraging them to study ancient battles for parallels to modern warfare. Sometimes, after reading a chapter, they'd gather around and talk about how the Spartans' sense of camaraderie mirrored their own. That love of learning never faded, even when deployed under austere conditions. Emotionally, of course, the greatest heartbreak was felt by those closest to him. His father, Daniel, has spent years keeping Michael's memory alive, speaking at events, supporting charities, and emphasizing the universal values of courage and compassion. His mother, Maureen, also carried a profound sense of loss, but found solace in seeing how her son's life continues to inspire others. Heather Duggan, who was poised to marry Michael in November 2005, faced a future she never imagined, one without the man she adored. Yet friends say that in her grief, she found ways to honor him, channeling that pain into remembering and sharing his best qualities. When we talk about controversies related to Michael Murphy's story, the most commonly cited one revolves around the rules of engagement. Did releasing unarmed civilians directly lead to the ambush? Would detaining them or taking a different action have changed the outcome? The truth is impossible to fully unravel, and the debate highlights the moral complexities of war. Michael's defenders point out that even if the SEALs had neutralized the civilians, an action that would have contradicted the rules of engagement, there's no guarantee the mission would have succeeded or ended any differently. Others believe it was the single event that sealed the team's fate. Yet, in the final analysis, Michael Murphy's life was defined by a commitment to doing the right thing, even if that meant exposing himself and his men to greater risk. History might debate such decisions from a distance, but in the moment, Michael acted in a way that was consistent with his conscience and his lifelong moral code. His sacrifice spurred a deeper conversation about how U.S. forces handle engagements with non-combatants in war zones. Military experts and policymakers often refer to Operation Red Wings when discussing the complexities of counterinsurgency missions in areas where combatants blend in with local populations. To this day, the after-action reports and personal testimonies from survivors such as Marcus Luttrell continue to shape military doctrine. In that sense, Michael's legacy also touches on broader strategic and ethical dimensions, reminding us that modern warfare is fraught with difficult moral terrain. Looking at the broader consequences of his life and sacrifice, there's no doubt that Michael Murphy holds a unique place in the pantheon of modern American heroes. On a personal level, he reminds us of the power of an individual who stands up for what's right, from a schoolyard in Long Island to a mountainside in Afghanistan. On a cultural level, his story resonates with a society that often struggles to agree on what heroism really means. Is it muscle and bravado, or is it selflessness under fire? Michael's life suggests it's the latter, a quiet, steadfast moral courage that surfaces in crucial moments. His actions also had a galvanizing effect on how communities honor their fallen. Fundraisers and charities established in Michael's name have provided scholarships for promising students, support for veterans organizations, and resources for the families of fallen service members. Each year, countless participants in the Murph Challenge endure that punishing workout, not just for personal fitness goals, but to remember someone who exemplified the highest standards of honor, courage, and commitment. One rarely discussed aspect of Michael's story comes from an anecdote shared by a fellow sailor who knew him shortly after Bud S. training. The sailor recounted a time Michael quietly paid the rent for a struggling shipmate who was on the verge of having nowhere to live. Michael never breathed a word about it to anyone. He simply left an envelope under the door and moved on, focusing on his duties. When confronted later and thanked, he just smiled and shrugged, muttering something along the lines of, "We take care of our own." That sense of brotherhood, of looking out for your fellow human being, was who he was, no matter the circumstance. Another striking fact that isn't always spotlighted is that Michael once considered pursuing law school if his military career hadn't taken him in a different direction. He was fascinated by the idea of justice, fair representation, and defending the voiceless. It wasn't a pipe dream. He even discussed it with a few mentors. In him, the line between warrior and defender blurred seamlessly. He could have excelled in a courtroom just as he did on the battlefield, bringing to either arena that same unwavering moral compass. Yet out of all the achievements and distinctions, it's his final act of self-sacrifice during Operation Red Wings that's etched into collective memory. A phone call to save his team, made under a barrage of gunfire. A quiet acceptance of the risk that sealed his destiny. That moment has become the symbolic peak of his legacy. When you read about it, you can't help but be struck by both the horror of that situation and the purity of his commitment. In the grand sweep of history, Michael Murphy's name stands among those who remind us that heroic stories don't always happen on grand stages or with big fanfare. Sometimes they unfold in rugged mountains, half a world away, witnessed by only a handful of people. Yet the ripple effects can be enormous. Decades from now, young men and women, whether in uniform or not, may read about him, watch documentaries, or attempt the Murphy workout, feeling an echo of what real heroism looks like. Perhaps they'll ask themselves what they would have done in that situation and be inspired to live with a bit more kindness, a bit more courage in their daily lives. If we take a moment to consider the moral and emotional lessons his story offers, one theme stands out: empathy. Michael's entire journey, from protecting a bullied child in a middle school corridor to saving the lives of fellow SEALs in his last moments, was an example of empathy in action. He felt for others, whether it was a vulnerable classmate or a teammate pinned down by gunfire. Empathy guided him to do right by people, even when the stakes were life and death. He wasn't naive. He understood the brutal realities of combat, but he also refused to relinquish his fundamental humanity in the name of convenience or self-preservation. This sense of empathy ties intimately to his unwavering moral code. Those who served with him often reflect on how calmly he made decisions under duress. The moral clarity he demonstrated wasn't impulsive or reckless. It was the product of years of living by certain principles. You see the same principle at work in how he made time for personal growth, reading extensively, learning from ancient warriors, or forging deep bonds with friends and colleagues. Whether it was picking up a book on Greek warfare or stepping between a bully and a victim, Michael's motivations remained consistent. Throughout history, stories of gallantry can sometimes take on mythic proportions, losing the nuances of a person's everyday life. In Michael's case, however, the more you learn, the more deeply human he becomes. He wasn't an unapproachable figure. He was someone who made mistakes, laughed at jokes, worried about his friends, got annoyed by petty irritations, and loved fierce, he said. That humanity is why his story resonates across generational lines. Whether one is a military buff, a civilian, a fellow athlete, or simply a curious person seeking inspiration, Michael's life offers a profoundly moving lesson. Big acts of courage are often built upon the small choices we make daily, choices to stand up for others, honor our commitments, and keep empathy at the forefront. The moral takeaway is both sobering and uplifting. Greatness often lies not in triumph over others, but in the willingness to put yourself in harm's way for the ones beside you. The next time you think about what it means to protect someone, whether it's standing up for a friend in a tense moment or making a sacrifice that puts personal interests second, maybe a flicker of Michael Murphy's story will come to mind. A man who from childhood embodied the spirit of the protector and who sealed that legacy on a mountainside far from home. Let Michael Murphy's life encourage you to choose the braver path. Let it remind you that real heroism, real virtue, is built in moments both small and great, and that even when the world seems chaotic, there remains a higher calling to serve and protect others with all the heart you can muster. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.